What's up everybody? Today I figured I would do a video considering I have quite a bit of Panasonic cameras and an Xtreme lens. So I wanted to show you guys today a comparison between the big three, HVX, HPX, and the HMC, and what they all look like on the Century Optics Xtreme fisheye lens.
Bruh.
Now, this comparison will kind of be slightly off just because I don't have an HVX mount for my Xtreme, but I'm going to try to get it as accurate as I can. The goal will be to set the cameras up and compare the distortion between each of the three cameras. Okay, so to start things off, my main camera setup right now is the HPX and the Century Optics Xtreme fisheye lens. Now, I like this camera because it has two P2 card mounts and it has a very, very robust zoom for long lens shots. Compared to the HVX, it's way more reliable and the zoom is 100 times better, as well as the distortion on the lens, which you will see in this comparison. Now, a lot of times I do use my HMC as well because I do film other video parts that aren't for me or for companies that don't necessarily want something that has the crispy look of the HPX. The HMC is a little bit more polished as it uses SD cards versus the typical P2 card format that the HVX and the HPX use. But personal favorite is the HPX and the Xtreme. It's my favorite setup ever, and I can see this setup being used for at least the next 10 years. And yeah, it's overall one of my favorite cameras to use. I come from originally a DVX with a Mark II fisheye platform, but I have recently made the switch over to HD, and it has not been easy. It has taken me a lot of time and a lot of research to figure out the perfect HD setup, and after a lot of R&D and just buying cameras and not liking them and buying lenses and not liking them, I finally have settled on the dream camera setup, quote unquote, that I would say everybody kind of wants, and that would be this guy right here. We're going to start off today with HVX because it's the first rendition of these Panasonic cameras, the HD Panasonic cameras. And this one has an 82mm lens. Now the problem with that is all of the other ones, the HPX and the HMC, those are threaded in 72. So the lens, the Bayo mount is actually bigger on this camera than it is on HPX and the HMC. So I'm gonna have to do a little bit of finagling, but I'm pretty sure I can adapt this lens to this camera just for research purposes, because it is not mounted on the camera, it'll just be mounted onto the rails. Okay, so now I wouldn't run a camera like this at all, ever, while I'm filming, but solely for research purposes, I already feel like I'm gonna break the handle off this camera. But this is what it looks like. Obviously, if you can see that, it's way offset. They do make a Century Optics Xtreme for this camera, but obviously this is not meant for this camera, so I'm not gonna try as hard to make it look perfect. All right, and the second camera that we will be using today is the HPX. This is what would be called the industry standard for skateboard cinematography, and it is a world-renowned camera. Pretty much every professional skateboard filmer uses this camera. Now, I'm not really going to go into specifics on these cameras and everything they do and their features and their quirks and everything. Ben Jones has a great video on everything you need to know about these Panasonic cameras, so I'm not going to go into that. This video is solely for comparing the Century fisheye with each of these three cameras. I'm putting the Xtreme on the HPX, so I'll have that mounted right now. Now if this angle looks a little different, it is because now I'm filming on the HPX, and the third camera that I will be comparing is the HMC, which is basically the SD card version of the HPX, but it films in a slightly different quality. I'm not really going to go into it, but the distortion rates are pretty much the same, but I'm just going to throw it in there because I have the camera.
So one big thing to compare is that the HMC and the HPX are pretty damn similar. I honestly would say that their distortion is not any different at all. The HMC and the HPX both use a focal length of 51 millimeters and can be zoomed out to 3.9, whereas the HVX uses a focal length of 55 millimeters, so it's going to be a little bit more zoomed in, and it only goes out to 4.2 zoom, which then in turn makes it slightly more zoomed in or has more of like a cropped look. Now for fisheyes, each camera actually slightly looks a little different. The HMC actually has the most vignette out of all of the cameras, as you can see in the top right corner, comparing to the HPX, which you can barely see any vignette in the top right corner. Now the HVX obviously has hella vignette. That's because the lens is not centered properly and it's a little bit smaller than the actual camera lens itself. But looking past that, normally the HVX doesn't have much vignette at all. It's honestly almost none, but you can tell how much more zoomed in the HVX looks compared to the HMC and HPX. Whereas you can see kind of like my bed and nightstand, whereas you can only really see the edge of my nightstand with the HVX.
Alright guys, so that is the comparison between the big three Panasonic cameras, HVX, HPX, and the HMC, which I am filming on currently. One thing to note is that the HVX wasn't completely accurate because the vignette was really kind of not centered due to the fact that my rails are set up for the HPX and HMC, but it kind of gives you a good look at distortion. Now, I don't really know if the distortion is different on the HPX Xtreme versus the HVX Xtreme, but at least you can kind of get a comparison on how they look with the long lens without the fisheye, because I did do that as well. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and hopefully you guys have a little bit more insight on what the Xtreme lens does and how it looks on these different cameras. So yeah, thank you guys for watching, and if you have any questions, put them down in the comments below and I will answer them. I do have quite a bit of knowledge on any of these Panasonic cameras, DVX, HVX, HPX, and HMC. So if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask. I will reply in the comments below. But yeah, thank you guys for watching, and hopefully you guys will be seeing more content with the Xtreme and the rest of these Panasonic cameras in the near future.